The dim glow of dawn barely penetrated the thick glass windows of the launch facility, casting long shadows across the faces of those who had gathered to witness the beginning of what was to be humanity's boldest journey. Captain Liam Baker stood at the forefront, his gaze fixed on the towering silhouette of the experimental spacecraft that promised to cut the travel time to Mars from months to mere weeks. Beside him, First Officer Grace Roberts shared the weight of anticipation, her eyes reflecting a determination equal to Baker's. The crew, handpicked for their expertise and resilience, stood in a semicircle behind their leaders. Dr. Henry Wallace, the mission's biologist, was lost in thought, pondering the alien ecosystems they might encounter. Lady Sarah Jennings, the engineer, checked her datapad one last time, running through the ship's systems with meticulous attention to detail. Dr. Alex Reed, a geologist, seemed to be mentally cataloging the rocks and soil samples she hoped to discover, while specialist Miles O'Connor, responsible for communications, was already making final checks on his equipment, ensuring they would remain connected with Earth. As the final preparations commenced, the tension among the crew was palpable, a mix of excitement and the apprehension of stepping into the unknown. The mission was clear: to investigate the silence that had befallen the Mars base, a silence that had echoed through the halls of the space agency with ominous foreboding. The crew boarded the spacecraft, their steps resonant with the weight of the journey ahead. The interior of the ship was a cocoon of technology, every surface and screen pulsating with life. As they strapped themselves in, Baker addressed his team with a solemnity that matched the gravity of their task. "Today we do not just travel to Mars, we journey into the unknown," Baker began, his voice steady. "What we find could redefine our place in the cosmos. Remember, no matter what happens, we face it together." Roberts added her own words of encouragement, her tone imbued with an unwavering confidence. "We've trained for every possible scenario, but it's more than just our training. It's our trust in each other that will see us through." The crew exchanged looks of solidarity, each person drawing strength from the other. With the final checks completed, the spacecraft began its ascent, piercing the early morning sky with a trail of fire. Earth receded into the distance, a pale blue dot against the vast backdrop of space, as they set course for Mars. The silence of space enveloped them, a profound quiet that spoke of the infinite mysteries lying beyond. The crew settled into their routines, the hum of the ship a constant reminder of their isolation and their purpose. Ahead lay the abandoned Mars base, its secrets shrouded in silence, waiting to be uncovered. As the red planet loomed larger with each passing day, the crew's anticipation grew. What awaited them on Mars was unknown, a puzzle pieced together from silence and speculation. But Baker and his crew were undeterred. They were explorers, pioneers at the edge of humanity's reach, ready to confront whatever mysteries lay hidden on the Martian surface. The journey to the lost Mars base had begun, and with it, a chapter in the annals of human exploration that would forever alter their understanding of the universe. The red dust swirled like ancient spirits greeting the newcomers as their ship touched down on the Martian surface. Mars greeted Baker, Roberts, and their crew with a silence as profound as the void they had traversed to reach it. The base, once a beacon of human ingenuity and the promise of a new frontier, stood desolate, its structures casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Without hesitation, they donned their suits and stepped into the Martian daylight, the crunch of their boots on the rust-colored soil breaking the omnipresent silence. The airlock of the Mars base hissed open, a sound unnaturally loud in the absolute stillness, as they made their way inside. The interior of the base was a time capsule, a moment frozen. Cups of coffee sat undisturbed on tables, personal belongings were neatly arranged in living quarters, and screens blinked with unheeded warnings and data. It was as if the crew had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the ghostly echo of their presence. Wallace moved straight to the lab, his curiosity piqued by the unexplained disappearance. Jennings surveyed the integrity of the base's structure and systems, while Reed collected soil and air samples from the inside, hoping they might reveal something about the base's sudden silence. O'Connor set up communication relays, attempting to pierce the veil of silence that had enveloped the base. As they explored, the crew's initial cohesion gave way to an uneasy silence. The base's abandoned state, coupled with the complete lack of any personal signs of struggle or hurried departure, gnawed at their nerves. It was as if the crew had been plucked from existence, leaving no trace but the belongings that littered the base. Baker led them through the corridors, his leadership never wavering despite the growing unease. Roberts, always his steadfast second, kept a close eye on their surroundings, her trained mind cataloging every detail, searching for anything that might explain the mystery before them. In the command center, amidst the blinking consoles and static-filled screens, they found the logbooks. The entries were routine until they abruptly stopped, the final words trailing off into nothingness. It offered no clues, no insight, just an abrupt end that mirrored the fate of the base's inhabitants. "This doesn't make sense," Baker muttered, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet thunderous in the silence. "It's as if they were interrupted mid-thought, mid-action." Roberts nodded, her eyes scanning the last entries. "There's no distress call, no warning, nothing. It's as if whatever happened, happened without warning, or without a trace." The mystery deepened, the silence of the base a heavy shroud that seemed to smother their thoughts. The crew moved through the base with a growing sense of dread, the unanswered questions multiplying with each step. Yet the determination to uncover the truth propelled them forward, into the heart of the unknown that awaited them on this distant, red planet. As the Martian sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the base's windows, the crew regrouped, their minds alight with theories and speculation. Yet, for all their expertise in technology, they stood on the threshold of an enigma that defied explanation, a reminder of the vast, unexplored cosmos that lay beyond the reach of human understanding. The silence of the base, once merely unsettling, now echoed with the whisper of secrets hidden in the Martian soil, secrets that beckoned them deeper into the mystery of the lost Mars base. The day's exploration had yielded more questions than answers, and as they prepared for the coming Martian night, the crew knew that whatever lay ahead, the truth was waiting for them, shrouded in the red dust of Mars. In the underbelly of the base, amidst the labyrinth of corridors and laboratories, Wallace stumbled upon a discovery that would redefine the boundaries of their mission. Within a sealed lab, far removed from the day-to-day hustle of the base's now absent crew, lay a petri dish encased in a containment unit. The dish housed a substance that defied explanation, amorphous, shimmering, with hues that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. Wallace called the team over, his voice a mix of excitement and caution. As Baker, Roberts, Jennings, Reed, and O'Connor gathered, they peered into the containment unit, each one trying to make sense of the spectacle before them. "It's alive," Wallace finally broke the silence, his gaze fixed on the substance. "But unlike anything we've known." Reed leaned closer, her curiosity piqued by the geological implications. Could it be extraterrestrial? She pondered aloud, her mind racing through the possibilities. Jennings, ever the engineer, was skeptical. Or a contamination, something that got out of hand, she suggested, her voice tinged with concern for the safety protocols of the base. O'Connor, who had been setting up a live feed back to Earth, paused to look at the discovery. "Whatever it is, it's going to make quite the headline," he remarked, half-jokingly attempting to lighten the mood. But the levity was short-lived. The substance began to pulsate, a rhythmic beating that seemed almost aware. Baker stepped back, his instincts as a captain kicking in. "Wallace, can you take a sample safely?" he asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the unease that had settled in his gut. With careful precision, Wallace used robotic arms within the containment unit to extract a sample of the substance. The moment the sample was secured, the remainder of the substance reacted violently, lashing against the containment unit with newfound ferocity. "Let's get this back to the ship for analysis," Roberts suggested, her tone carrying an urgency that spurred the crew into action. The discovery was too significant. As they prepared to transport the sample, Jennings couldn't shake off a creeping dread. What if this is what caused the disappearance? She voiced the question that had been lingering unspoken among them. The crew fell silent, the gravity of Jennings' words hanging in the air. The base, with its abandoned coffee cups and personal belongings, suddenly felt even more sinister, as if the very walls harbored secrets too horrifying to comprehend. With the sample secured, the crew made their way back to the ship, the Martian landscape around them seemingly indifferent to the potential Pandora's box they carried. The red sands shifted softly, whispering tales of a planet that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless epochs, now bearing witness to a new chapter of human ambition and, perhaps, folly. The journey back was tense, each member of the crew lost in their thoughts, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. The unknown substance, now a silent passenger among them, represented a breakthrough, a nightmare, and a mystery all at once. As they docked with the ship, the reality of their situation set in. They were millions of miles from home, standing on the edge of a discovery that could change everything. The silence of Mars enveloped them, a stark reminder of their isolation and the unknown dangers that lay ahead. The substance safely contained within the ship's lab was a silent enigma, its secrets locked within its shifting form. But as night fell on Mars, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, the crew knew that the darkness hid not just the physical dangers of an alien world, but the potential terror of what they had brought aboard. The mission had taken a turn into the unknown, and there was no going back. The ship's lab was a flurry of activity as Wallace, under the watchful eyes of his crewmates, began the analysis of the alien substance. The air was thick with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The substance, now isolated within a high-security containment chamber, seemed to pulsate more vigorously, as if aware of the scrutiny it was under. Reed, leaning against the bulkhead, watched the analysis with keen interest. "Do you think it's sentient?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the alien matter. Wallace, his focus unwavering, didn't look up from his microscope. "Too early to say," he responded, "but it's unlike any biological material known to us. Its cellular structure, if you can even call it that, defies our understanding of biology." O'Connor, who had been documenting the process, shifted uncomfortably. "It's like it's staring back at us," he muttered half to himself. The tension in the room spiked as the substance suddenly expanded, pressing against the containment unit's walls. Jennings, who had been monitoring the unit's integrity, announced, "Pressure's increasing. It's reacting to something." "Could it be reacting to us?" Roberts posed the question, her gaze locked on the containment unit. Before anyone could respond, a series of events unfolded with terrifying swiftness. The substance breached the containment unit, a tendril lashing out like a whip. O'Connor, standing closest, had no time to react. The tendril wrapped around him, pulling him towards it. His screams were muffled instantly, his body enveloped by the alien mass. The crew recoiled in horror, the reality of their situation crashing down on them. Baker, springing into action, shouted orders. "Seal the lab, now!" His command cut through the chaos, but it was too late for O'Connor. Jennings, with shaking hands, initiated the emergency containment protocol, sealing the lab doors and trapping the alien substance inside with O'Connor's rapidly disappearing form. The crew, pressed against the corridor's window, could only watch in horror as the substance consumed O'Connor, his body disintegrating before their eyes, absorbed into the alien mass. The process was grotesquely fascinating, a horrifying spectacle of body horror unfolding in real time. When it was over, the substance retracted, leaving no trace of O'Connor except for the haunting echo of his screams. Wallace, pale and shaken, voiced the fear gripping each of them. "It's predatory, and we're its prey." The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. They were not alone on the ship, and the alien presence was not just a scientific curiosity. It was a threat, a deadly, incomprehensible force that had claimed one of their own. Roberts, her voice steady despite the circumstances, brought their focus back. "We need to quarantine the entire lab, make sure it can't spread, then we figure out how to deal with it." The crew nodded, a silent agreement forged in the face of unimaginable horror. They had come seeking answers, but now they were fighting for survival, against an entity that defied their understanding of life itself. As they moved to implement their quarantine procedures, the ship felt smaller, the corridors narrower. The isolation of space, once a marvel to behold, now felt like a prison, trapping them with an alien horror beyond their comprehension. The loss of O'Connor was a grim reminder of the stakes. They were in uncharted territory, both physically and metaphorically. The mission had changed, and so had they. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but retreat was not an option. They had to face the alien threat, for O'Connor, for themselves, and for humanity. In the wake of O'Connor's horrifying demise, a palpable change swept through the crew. The once cohesive unit began to fracture under the weight of fear and suspicion. The alien entity, with its incomprehensible predatory nature, became an unseen specter haunting every corridor of their spacecraft, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Wallace, once the voice of scientific curiosity, now wore a perpetual look of haunted introspection. His sleep was fitful, plagued by nightmares of being consumed by the alien substance, a fate he had narrowly avoided. The lab, once his sanctuary, had become a tomb in his eyes, a place where death had shown its hand with ruthless efficiency. Jennings, tasked with ensuring the ship's operational integrity, found herself second-guessing every shadow, every unexpected noise within the ship's hull. The engineering bay, filled with the hum of machinery and the soft glow of indicator lights, felt like a breeding ground for the unknown. Her hands trembled as she worked, the fear of another containment breach never far from her mind. Reed, whose passion for geology had driven her to the stars, now found herself questioning the very ground she walked on. The samples she had collected, once sources of excitement, now seemed like potential carriers of the unknown. Her scientific curiosity was overshadowed by the fear of what lay hidden in the Martian soil, of what they might have unwittingly brought aboard. The tension reached a breaking point when Reed, driven to the edge by the constant state of fear, barricaded herself in the geology lab. Her voice, once calm and measured, was now tinged with hysteria as she raved about the alien substance's potential, spread through the ship's ventilation system. "It's here! It's everywhere!" she screamed, her words echoing through the ship's communication system. Baker and Roberts, attempting to maintain order, faced their own inner turmoil. The responsibility for their crew's safety weighed heavily on Baker, the loss of O'Connor a stark reminder of the consequences of failure. Roberts, ever the pragmatic one, found her resolve tested as she watched her crew succumb to paranoia. The breaking point came when they forced open the geology lab's door, only to find Reed in the midst of a horrific transformation. Her body, twisted into unnatural angles, was a grotesque tableau of the alien substance's capability. Her eyes, once full of intelligence and curiosity, were now glazed over, her voice a garbled mix of human and alien. The sight of Reed, once a respected colleague, now a victim of the very phenomenon they sought to understand, sent a shockwave of despair through the crew. Wallace, Jennings, Baker, and Roberts stood in stunned silence, the reality of their situation crashing down upon them. They were not just fighting for survival against an alien entity. They were fighting to maintain their humanity in the face of cosmic horror. The realization that they might not survive, that they might end up like Reed or O'Connor, became a tangible presence among them, feeding their fears, driving them further into the depths of despair. As they sealed the geology lab, leaving Reed's mutated form behind, the crew knew that the horror was far from over. They were trapped in a cycle of fear and paranoia, with the alien entity lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. In the cold, silent expanse of space, the crew of the spacecraft grappled with the haunting reality of their situation. The discovery of Reed's transformation had cast a pall over the ship, a grim reminder of the alien threat that lurked among them. Amid this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, Jennings made a discovery that would shed light on the dark mystery enveloping them. While combing through the base's encrypted files in a desperate search for answers, Jennings stumbled upon a series of classified documents that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. With a mixture of dread and determination, she called Baker and Roberts to the communication hub, where the decrypted files lay open, revealing the harrowing truth behind the Mars base's silence. The documents detailed a covert operation to study an ancient Martian bacteria, discovered deep beneath the planet's surface. This organism, according to the files, was believed to have the ability to alter organic matter, a potential breakthrough for bioengineering and life support systems. The excitement of the researchers was palpable in the early logs, filled with optimistic predictions of revolutionizing space colonization. However, as the entries progressed, a chilling narrative unfolded. The bacteria, initially docile, began exhibiting unpredictable behaviors, mutating rapidly in response to terrestrial biology. The researchers' notes transformed from scientific curiosity to frantic warnings, detailing the organism's capacity to assimilate and reshape living tissue into grotesque, unrecognizable forms. It was supposed to be the answer to our sustainability problems, Jennings read aloud, her voice heavy with the weight of their findings. Instead, they unleashed a nightmare. The crew sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. The alien substance, the cause of O'Connor's death and Reed's mutation, was not a malevolent invader but the product of human ambition, a Pandora's box of biological horrors unwittingly opened. Baker clenched his fists, the burden of command heavier than ever. "We need to destroy it," he declared, his voice resolute, "before it can reach Earth." Roberts nodded, her pragmatic mind already racing through potential solutions. "We'll need to figure out its weaknesses, understand how it can be contained or eradicated." Wallace, his scientific curiosity now shadowed by the grim reality of their situation, offered a sobering thought. If it can assimilate organic matter this efficiently, we're not just dealing with a biological hazard. We're dealing with something that could fundamentally alter the ecosystem of Earth. The revelation cast a new light on their mission, transforming it from a quest for answers to a desperate fight to prevent a catastrophe. The stakes were no longer just their survival, but the safeguarding of Earth itself from an alien horror of their own making. As they set to work, analyzing the data, experimenting with samples of the bacteria in controlled environments, and devising potential countermeasures, the ship became a floating laboratory on the front lines of an unseen war. Every test, every experiment brought them closer to understanding the entity that had claimed their crewmates and threatened their home. The crew worked with a single-minded focus, driven by the dual specters of guilt and responsibility. They had embarked on this mission in the spirit of discovery, only to find themselves guardians against an apocalypse of their own making. As the red planet receded in the distance, the spacecraft and its crew hurtled through the void, carrying with them the hope of finding a solution. The journey back to Earth was no longer just a return home, but a race against time to avert a disaster that they had unwittingly helped unleash. The truth about the lost Mars base had been unveiled, but the battle to contain the consequences of that truth was just beginning. The ship, now a crucible of human resilience and scientific endeavor, hurtled through the cold void back towards Earth. Inside, Baker, Roberts, Wallace, and Jennings, the remnants of a crew once bound by curiosity, were now forged together by the desperate purpose of containing the alien horror that had claimed their friends. Their resolve was tested further when the entity, in a display of horrific adaptability, breached the containment measures that had been hastily erected in the wake of the initial outbreak. Its growth accelerated, consuming organic matter within the ship to expand its grotesque form. The crew watched in horror as it assimilated materials, equipment, even the air they breathed seemed to feed its relentless expansion. The situation demanded a sacrifice. Wallace, whose life had been dedicated to the study of life's mysteries, volunteered for what they all understood to be a suicide mission. "It's drawn to biological matter," he explained, his voice steady, resigned. "I'll lead it into the airlock. Once it's contained, jettison me and it into space." The plan was met with vehement protests, particularly from Roberts, whose pragmatic nature warred with the emotional toll of their losses. "There has to be another way," she argued, desperation creeping into her voice. But Baker, carrying the weight of command, knew the grim reality of their situation left them with few options. "It's our best chance," he said, his gaze meeting each of theirs in turn, "and our only way to ensure this thing doesn't reach Earth." Preparations were made in grim silence, the ship's corridors echoing with the sounds of a crew resigned to their fates. Wallace, equipped with bait made from the ship's remaining organic samples, made his way to the airlock, the entity slithering behind him, a mass of tendrils and flesh that seemed to pulsate with malevolent intent. As he stepped into the airlock, Wallace looked back at his crewmates, a final nod of farewell. The airlock sealed with a hiss, and the entity, sensing its prey trapped, surged forward, filling the chamber with its monstrous form. Roberts, stationed at the airlock control, hesitated for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering over the release mechanism. It was Jennings who placed her hand over Roberts, pressing it down, together initiating the airlock's purge. The outer doors opened and the void of space consumed Wallace and the entity in a silent maelstrom. The crew watched through the viewport as their friend and the monstrous form were expelled into the emptiness, where the entity, deprived of its source of sustenance, seemed to writhe in agony before freezing, its form breaking apart in the vacuum. The sacrifice was a somber victory, the loss of Wallace a wound that would never fully heal. Yet, in the immediate aftermath, there was no time for mourning. Jennings, channeling her grief into action, led the repair efforts, her engineering prowess keeping them afloat in the void. Baker and Roberts, the command duo who had steered their crew through unimaginable horrors, worked alongside her, each task a tribute to the fallen. The entity's threat had been neutralized, but the scars it left on the crew and their mission were indelible. The journey back to Earth was now a silent procession, a spacefaring funeral for those they had lost. But it was also a mission of warning, carrying with it the urgent need to prevent such horrors from being unleashed again. The aftermath of Wallace's sacrifice left the crew of the spacecraft in a somber silence, a void filled with the weight of what had been lost and what still lay ahead. Baker, Roberts, and Jennings, the survivors of a mission that had spiraled into the realms of cosmic horror, now faced the daunting task of returning to Earth with the knowledge and warnings of what they had encountered. As the ship limped through space, its systems taxed by the repairs and the previous encounters with the alien entity, Baker and Roberts convened in the command module, a silent agreement between them that the mission's final phase was upon them. They needed to prepare, not just for the journey back, but for the reception of their findings. Jennings, meanwhile, busied herself with the ship's diagnostics, ensuring that their vessel would hold together for the return trip. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her thoughts were with Wallace, with O'Connor, and with Reed. The loss of her colleagues, her friends, had forged in her a determination to see their sacrifice not be in vain. But the alien entity, or the remnants of its presence, had one more horror to unveil. As they neared the outskirts of Earth's solar system, the ship's systems began to malfunction in a manner eerily reminiscent of the entity's behavior. Jennings, delving into the diagnostics, discovered with a sinking heart that the entity had integrated itself into the ship's bioorganic systems, a last malevolent act from the void. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Baker clenched his fists, the weight of command heavier than ever, as he realized the implication of their situation. "We can't risk bringing it to Earth," he stated, the resolve in his voice masking the turmoil within. Roberts, her pragmatic mind racing through scenarios, suggested, "We need to send the data ahead, warn them, then find a way to destroy the ship." Their plan was desperate, a final gambit to prevent the horror they had faced from reaching their home. Jennings worked to isolate the ship's communication systems, ensuring a clean transmission of their findings to Earth. The data packet included everything: their encounters, the sacrifices, and the stark warning of the entity's capabilities. With the transmission sent, Baker and Roberts set the ship's course for a trajectory that would see it burn up in the sun, ensuring the entity's destruction. As they prepared for their final act, a sense of peace, fleeting but profound, settled over them. They had done everything within their power to avert disaster, to warn Earth of the dangers that lay in the uncharted territories of space. In a last-ditch effort to save themselves, Baker and Roberts initiated an escape protocol, launching a small emergency shuttle designed for short-range travel. The shuttle, cramped and rudimentary, was their lifeline, a slender hope in the face of overwhelming odds. As the main ship continued on its course towards the sun, Baker, Roberts, and Jennings watched from the shuttle's viewport, a silent farewell to their once proud vessel as it was consumed by the stellar inferno. As they set their sights on Earth, a distant blue speck in the sea of stars, the crew of the shuttle knew their journey was far from over. Adrift in the vast silence of space, the emergency shuttle became a fragile sanctuary for Baker, Roberts, and Jennings. Their relief at having escaped the doomed ship was short-lived, overshadowed by the grim realization of the new challenge they faced: the long journey home on limited life support, with the specter of the entity's influence still haunting them. As they plotted their course towards Earth, conserving every possible resource, a sense of unease began to permeate the shuttle. It started with subtle changes, almost imperceptible at first. Roberts, who had always been the rock among them, began to exhibit signs of distress. Her sleep became restless, filled with nightmares that left her gasping for air in the stifling confines of the shuttle. Baker and Jennings noticed the change in Roberts but attributed it to the stress of their situation. They focused on maintaining the shuttle's systems, ensuring they remained on course, and keeping their spirits up through shared stories of what they missed about Earth. Yet as days turned into weeks, Roberts' condition worsened. Her skin took on a pallor, her veins visibly darkening, a stark contrast against her increasingly translucent skin. It was Jennings who first voiced the fear that had taken root in her. "The entity," she whispered, her voice barely carrying in the cramped space. "It could have affected her." Baker, ever the captain, refused to let despair take hold. "We'll monitor her condition," he decided, his voice carrying a determination that belied his own dread. "We're going to make it back. All of us." But as Robert's transformation accelerated, it became impossible to ignore the horrifying truth. The entity had indeed left its mark on her, altering her very biology in ways they could scarcely comprehend. Her moments of lucidity grew fewer, her speech interspersed with phrases that seemed alien, her gaze distant, as if seeing beyond the confines of their reality. In a moment of clarity, Roberts herself recognized the danger she posed to her crewmates. "You have to let me go," she implored Baker, her voice a mix of resignation and fear, "before it's too late." Baker and Jennings, faced with an impossible choice, wrestled with the decision. To lose Roberts, to willingly let her go, seemed anathema to everything they had endured. Yet, the risk of her complete transformation into something akin to the entity that had haunted their mission was too great. In the end, it was Roberts who made the choice for them. With a strength born of will and desperation, she locked herself in the airlock, her eyes meeting Baker's through the small window. "Tell them," she mouthed, a final plea to ensure their story was heard, to prevent anyone else from suffering their fate. With heavy hearts, Baker and Jennings complied. The shuttle's airlock opened, and Roberts was gently expelled into the void, her body convulsing once before drifting away, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the stars. The transformation that had begun inside her continued, her body expanding and then dissolving in a silent display of cosmic horror, a final testament to the entity's insidious power. The loss of Roberts left a void in the shuttle, her presence missed in every silent hour that passed. Baker and Jennings, now the sole survivors, faced the remainder of their journey with a renewed sense of purpose. They bore not only the weight of their own survival, but the duty to warn Earth of the dangers that lay waiting in the dark reaches of space. As they neared Earth, the blue marble growing larger in their viewport, Baker and Jennings prepared themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. They had survived the horrors of the unknown, but their mission was far from over. They carried with them a warning, a plea to heed the lessons of their ordeal, to respect the boundaries of human exploration and the mysteries of the cosmos. The shuttle's approach to Earth was a silent vigil, a journey's end that marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that Baker and Jennings would face with the courage and determination that had seen them through the darkness. They were the bearers of a grave warning, the guardians of a truth that would shape the future of humanity's place among the stars. The shuttle's descent through Earth's atmosphere marked the end of Baker and Jennings' harrowing journey from the depths of space. The world they were returning to was unaware of the nightmares that lurked beyond its skies, of the sacrifices made to keep those nightmares at bay. As the shuttle touched down on the familiar soil of home, the relief of survival was tempered by the weight of the knowledge they bore. In the days that followed their return, Baker and Jennings found themselves debriefed in sterile rooms by officials whose concern for the implications of their story was matched only by their skepticism. The evidence, the samples they had hoped to bring back had been lost with Roberts and the destruction of their ship, leaving only their testimony to paint a picture of the cosmic horror they had faced. Despite the disbelief, Baker and Jennings persisted, their story consistent and compelling. They spoke of the entity, of the sacrifices of Wallace, O'Connor, and Roberts, and of the urgent need for caution in humanity's reach into the stars. Their warning was a plea to respect the unknown, to tread carefully on the soil of other worlds. But as the debriefings continued, a disturbing realization began to dawn on Baker. He had felt a nagging discomfort since their return, a sense of being unwell that he had attributed to the stress and exhaustion of their ordeal. However, as he caught his reflection in the mirror of a washroom, the truth became undeniable. His eyes, once a clear blue, now held a hint of the same otherworldly shimmer he had seen in Roberts before her transformation. The veins at his temples pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, and his skin held a pallor that no amount of rest could remedy. The entity, it seemed, had found a way to Earth after all, not through the samples they had hoped to secure, but within him. The horror of the realization was a cold vice around his heart. He had become the very threat they had sacrificed so much to prevent. The implications were catastrophic, not just for him, but for the world he had hoped to save. In a moment of clarity, Baker understood what he had to do. He could not allow the infection to spread, could not become the vector for Earth's undoing. With a heavy heart, he made his way to Jennings, his resolve set. Jennings, seeing the change in him, the eerie glow of his eyes, understood without words. The grief in her eyes was a mirror to his own, but beneath it lay the same ironclad resolve that had seen them through the darkest reaches of space. Together they formulated a plan, a way to contain the threat Baker now posed. It was a plan that required one last sacrifice, a final act to ensure the safety of humanity. The world never learned of Jennings and Baker's fate, of the choice they made in the silence of an undisclosed facility.